Pope Francis has just landed in Iraq, where he's going to fulfill a long-standing promise to become the first pontiff to visit the country. The three-day visit is his first trip outside Italy since the pandemic began. He's going to be welcomed by the Prime Minister in Baghdad before meeting President Pilgrim at the presidential palace. The head of the Roman Catholic Church says he's going as a pilgrim of peace. We're bringing you live pictures from Baghdad airport as the Pope's flight Airbus A330, the flight A74000, has just arrived in front of the red carpet. You can see the Iraqi military honour guard standing there. I want to bring in our correspondent, Simona Faltin, who's outside the presidential palace in Baghdad. She's joining us live. This is clearly a very important visit for the Pope, but it's also, of course, very important for the Christians in Iraq as well.
Yes, indeed. They are seeing this visit as something very important, something to give them hope after years and decades, really, of persecution that has resulted in a significant decline in their numbers. Before the U.S.-led 2003 invasion, there were over 1 million Christians here in Iraq, and that number has dwindled in the past 17 years to less than 300,000. So this visit by Pope Francis is really aiming to give them hope, to encourage them to remain in their ancient lands, to really sustain this Christian minority here. But of course, the big question is whether Pope Francis will focus on the spiritual aspects of this visit, or whether he will actually tackle some of the policy issues which are resulting in the persecution and oppression of Christians. One of those issues, for example, is the presence of military groups in the Nineveh Plains, which is home to many Christians. Some of these armed groups that are present there have prevented the returns of Christians who were displaced by the latest war against Iceland. This is something that organizations that deal with minority rights have demanded the Pope to tackle when he meets the president later here at the presidential palace. They want him to bring up these difficult topics. They want him to actually mention these recommendations to try to actually result in some political change. But of course, this will be very difficult because the problems afflicting the Christian community today are problems that are afflicting all of Iraq, really. It is the challenges for the state to control the weapons in the hand of formal security forces. It is the rule of law. It is the respect for human rights. It's not just Iraq's Christians that are suffering from these issues. It is Iraq as a country as a whole, and the government has really struggled to, for example, control some of the armed groups that have been accused of perpetrating human rights abuses, among others, against the Christian communities. And these kind of issues will, of course, be something that the Pope may not be able to bring up, and certainly that would be very difficult for the government here to resolve. But there is definitely a lot of hope, a lot of expectations, which merely highlights the level of needs in this country.
Just as you're talking there, Simona, we're watching live pictures from Baghdad airport. As I say, the steps have just been moved up to the door of the aircraft, which is currently closed. We're waiting for the preparations for that to open any moment. We've also earlier on, and certainly in the last hour or so, seen crowds of people lining the streets waiting for the Pope to arrive. But one of the problems is going to be that the Pope is not going to be able to meet large crowds of people because of the uptick in coronavirus in Iraq. So security and safety is clearly going to be important here.
Yes, indeed. The security is really something that has been, of course, a big challenge for authorities here, because this is a country that is facing many problems on that front. There is the coronavirus pandemic, which you mentioned. We're currently having around 5,000 new cases per day. There is, of course, still a threat by ISIL. There are sleeper cells across the country which have launched repeated attacks against security forces. We've had a pretty sizable suicide bombing here in the capital in January, which claimed dozens of lives. And then there are also frequent rocket attacks that are targeting especially U.S. interests here in Iraq. The last rocket attack happened just 2 days ago and claimed the life of one U.S. civilian contractor in western Anbar. So there are enormous challenges for the security forces here to really ensure that this itinerary by the Pope, which spans thousands of kilometers going from Baghdad to southern Iraq and then to northern Iraq, is properly secured, that there is no potential security breach that could somehow hamper this journey. And of course, the security forces are on very high alert. They have blocked off the green zone, which is this fortified area in Baghdad, which houses a lot of the government institutions, as well as the United Nations and embassies. That space has been completely closed off to enable quick and safe passage for the Pope. And of course, security forces have also been deployed throughout the city. We've seen very heavy security presence throughout, checkpoints being set up to search cars, to check badges, because only people with special badges are allowed to be even out on the street today, because there is a curfew in place Friday, Saturday and Sunday, the exact days when the Pope is traveling around, to prevent the movement of people, to prevent the movement of cars, and really to reduce the number of people who will come out to greet him, which is certainly a little bit counterintuitive for the Christian community, because they certainly want to get out to the streets. They want to see him. They want to greet him and really get the inspiration from this visit. And that may be difficult for many people, because the number of spaces that have been allocated at each and every venue that he visits are relatively limited. Only a small number of people will be able to attend, and that is of course both for security reasons, but also to try to reduce the number of new COVID cases that we have seen in the country.
We're just seeing again pictures from the aircraft, the Al Italia aircraft, which is waiting on the apron at Baghdad airport. We can see the Pope standing at the top of the steps there, waiting to being greeted by an official there. There are also crowds of well-wishers who are clearly, and officials who are waiting at the bottom of the steps. What impact is the Pope's visit, do you think, going to have on the future of Christians in Iraq? Is there a confidence that their standing in the country is going to be in any way improved by this visit, Simona?
Well, I think from his side there is certainly hope that he wants to encourage them to stay, because the way we have seen the numbers of Christians decline over the past few years, it really looks as though this community is disappearing. I recently, a few months ago, I spoke to a priest in the northern town of Bartella, which used to be a majority Christian town, but which has in recent years become majority Muslim. And that priest was telling me, look, I will stay. He was an elderly man, but he says, like, I cannot force the new generation to stay. They have options to emigrate abroad, to start new and better lives abroad, to be free, to be able to practice their religion safely. And of course, that is a very fair demand of this Christian community. But on the other hand, there are many who feel like, no, this is my homeland. I want to stay here. I want to try to preserve this ancient heritage of ours, to make sure that this community endures. And these are the people that the Pope really wants to reach out to. He wants to encourage them to persevere, to stay in Iraq, so that this minority doesn't completely vanish. But as I mentioned before, that will take some very, very concrete policy measures that would need to be implemented. We've actually seen a statement come out by a group of 46 NGOs that work on minority rights, and they have listed a number of recommendations that they would like the Pope to raise with Iraq's leaders while he is here. And among those recommendations are, for example, reparations for victims of genocide as a result of ISIL. They also want justice for victims who have suffered from the war with ISIL. They want political and security arrangements that will protect ethno-religious minorities. And of course, what they're alluding to is the presence of armed groups that are officially part of the state security infrastructure, but that a lot of times act outside of the chain of command. And those groups are partly blamed for persecuting Christians in the north. I actually interviewed one of the commanders of these groups, who has been recently sanctioned by the United States. His name is Wad Kado. He leads the 30th Brigade of the Popular Mobilization Forces in Bartella, which is a town in the north. And he has been sanctioned for, so to say, preventing Christians from returning to that town. So whether or not Christians in Iraq feel that they can actually have a tangible political change as a result of this visit. It will really depend on the state's ability to try to assert rule of law, to try to really strengthen its institutions. And that is something that, of course, is way beyond the Pope's ability. This is something that will need years and decades of state building.
Nevertheless, I mean, the Pope is certainly in religious terms is going to be meeting with, I believe there's an interreligious meeting at the ancient site of Ur, which is scheduled, I believe, for Saturday. But he is going to be meeting a wide variety of religious leaders within Iraq. And that is significant as well, isn't it? Because Iraq is a country where several religious followings are represented, but not only in the street, but also, of course, in Parliament as well and politically.
That is correct, and perhaps the most significant personality he will be meeting is Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani, who is basically the religious authority of Shia Muslims here in Iraq. He will be meeting him tomorrow in Najaf, and the idea of that meeting is really to foster tolerance and coexistence between the religions. That is certainly expected to be a very significant meeting. It is not exactly certain what will come out of it, whether there will be any kind of official agreement that will be signed between the two sides or some kind of joint statement that will be made. But that meeting very much underlines the theme of this visit, which is "You are all brothers," which is, of course, a verse from the Bible. And the Pope really wants to underline the commonalities between the three Abrahamic religions, which are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. He wants to really emphasize the similarities between these faiths rather than the differences, hoping that that his visit can somehow reset relations, that it can somehow be the beginning of a new start. And that is, of course, why he's also going to Ur, which is in southern Iraq, in the province of Dhikar. There he will be holding an interfaith dialogue with Muslim leaders to try to, again, emphasize the commonalities, because of course Ur is thought to be the birthplace of Abraham, the patriarch of the three monotheistic faiths. It is there where he was supposed to have been born before he received the call, as the Bible goes, from God to migrate to the Promised Land. And of course he's somebody who is very important for Christians, Jews and Muslims alike. For Muslims, he is known as Prophet Ibrahim. He is the one who is celebrated during the Islamic holiday of Eid al-Adha to honor his sacrifice, and he's also who is thought to have built the Kaaba in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, which is, of course, one of the main the main pilgrimage site for Muslims. So in visiting sites like these in Ur, the Pope is really honoring the heritage and the memory of Christians in Iraq, but also hoping that he can somehow set a new foundation, that he can perhaps even incentivize Christians to come to Iraq as part of a pilgrimage to visit, for example, Abraham's house in Ur. So from a spiritual perspective, this visit is really hugely important, but the question again is, will it result in any kind of real policy changes on the ground that will change the relations between Muslims and Christians?
We're just seeing pictures there of the inside of the airport now, where the Pope has moved inside. He's being flanked by people what appear to be traditional dress, who are appear to be singing, I believe, as he walks up the aisle. When you've been talking to people in Baghdad, Simona, is there an indication from non-Christians about how important they regard this visit, or is this something that is not as high a priority for people who are not Christians?
Well, most people that I have spoken have been really excited about this visit, because it's not just important for the Christians, it also in a way shows that Iraq is perhaps stable enough to welcome the Pope. We have seen very few Western heads of state or important dignitaries visit this country precisely because it is associated with instability, with war. So just the very fact that the Pope is coming to Iraq, that he is trusting the Iraqi state to protect him, that he feels comfortable going not just to the airport and to the green zone, but outside the green zone, to move around across Baghdad, to move around across Iraq. It is in a way very encouraging to ordinary Iraqis, not just Christians, that perhaps this is a new page for Iraq, that perhaps this is a sign that things are perhaps improving. So in general, they have very much welcomed him. But of course, on the other hand, there are also a lot of expectations with regard to what he can achieve for Muslims. A lot of people have been actually posting messages on social media demanding that the Pope visit certain places because they know that the places that he has visited, they have received more attention from the government lately. For example, roads have been paved in Ur leading up to the archaeological site that he will visit. Roads have been cleaned and repaired. So there is, in a way, some belief that only the places that the Pope will visit will receive attention from the government. So, of course, even non-Christians, even Muslims have a lot of expectations tied to this visit, that it will usher in some improvement in their lives.
Simona, thank you very much indeed. This is Simona 14 talking to us from Baghdad as Pope Francis arrives at Baghdad airport at the start of a 3-day visit to the country. It's the first ever papal visit to the country, his first international trip since the start of the pandemic. Well, Yonadam Khanna is head of Iraq's Christian Al-Rafidain parliamentary bloc, and he says this is a historic moment for Christians in Iraq.
That almost 2,000 years later, the Pope of Vatican visit us here in such difficult situation, and Iraq is suffering from very different issues, pandemic and economical and everything, and even conflicts in the region between America and Iran, and many other issues. So we are very happy and welcoming His Holiness. That we hope that he for sure he is bringing the message of peace and love and forgiveness, Jesus' message, and his visit will have many positive reflects on Iraqi society and in the region and globally as well, because as you know, the reflect and the effect of the ISIS and the Al-Qaeda crimes against humanity, against people here, reflect very negatively on the Islamic image in Europe and America and everywhere. So his visit to our religious leaders in Iraq gives very good positive reflect and bring down a bit the Islamophobia in Europe and America and Western societies.